Good morning. That was my fault. I was in front of the speaker. Okay, good morning. Sorry, I don't mean to hurt your ears. So my dog's name is Patty, and it's really simple. It's actually the perfect dog name. In college, this is kind of embarrassing, so we'll start with embarrassment. In college, my nickname from my roommates and our close group of friends is they just call me Papa Bear. It's a whole thing. So then naturally, when Jordan and I get married, Jordan became Ma Bear or Mama Bear. And if you're around the house much, you'll hear me call her Ma Bear. If you're around our college friends, you'll hear them call her Ma Bear. And we got our dog not knowing we were pregnant with our first. It's always fun when you're raising a puppy and an infant. And it was like, okay, we need a bear name for our dog. And then Patty was the one that was the winner. I didn't pick it. That's all I'm going to say. I didn't pick Patty, but we love our dog, Patty. Very happy to be here today. Fun, interesting morning in the Brady house. Jordan lets me do our daughter's hair on days that she works, and she has to leave too early. So the last couple of years, after one morning, I showed up at the preschool here. I don't remember what teacher Tamara had, but I drop off, it was Anna. Drop Anna off, and we did it at the door back then. This was pre-COVID. Drop her off, and I hand her teacher a brush and a ponytail holder. And I apologized, and then I went home, or I went to work. And then later that day, I was like, okay, we got a choice to make here, right? I can either be dad that does none of the girl things, or I can acknowledge that God gave me two daughters. Like, I can't do both. So I started learning how to do hair. The girls ratted on me, told mommy that whenever we practice hair, daddy has a video of YouTube up on the bathroom counter, and he pauses it often. And so I've learned to braid in things, but with photo day being today at Mary Martin Elementary. And Jordan worked today, so this would normally be a day that I get up a little bit earlier and then see Jordan right before she goes. She lines things up so that me and the kiddos can just take off. But today we woke up even earlier because I was like, all right, so how do you want me to do their hair tomorrow? This was last night, and Jordan just smiled. She's like, you're so pretty. She's like, I'm doing their hair tomorrow. Well, no, you got to work. I'm doing their hair tomorrow. So Jordan did Anna's hair today. I did Josie's. That's why we're in a ponytail with a little curl on the back. But it's not personal, but it was fun. Last time I was here, I told y'all a lot about our garden. It was in like April, May when things like sky water was falling. There was hope abounding. Our garden did great. I had lots of conversations with y'all about our garden throughout the early part of the summer. And then whenever we hit like 147 degrees for July and August, we just let that sucker go. And now it's a tribute to droughts. Which, funny thing, during the process of our garden, our neighbor, Brian, has a massive garden. And so it's really been a cool thing for us to develop a better relationship with them. It's just an excuse to talk with one another. But we're over there visiting his garden, because that's what you do. And it's not even Memorial Day, and his corn is thigh high. And I was like, what did you put in that? And he was like, no, we just started it in February this year. I was like, why? And he goes, well, because the drought hit last year pretty hard, and we thought it might do it again. And I was like, turns out, smart. I was not thinking smart. I was like, you idiot. Like, look at all this rain we're getting. He was smart. I'm the moron. So our garden died, and we borrowed food from them. So it worked out. I like to give you a quick college and equip update every time I'm with you. I love being here. This is a fun group to be with for me. So, of course, we have the building, and we've been able to use that building on campus more. Pickleball has been a draw that I would have never imagined. It turns out you tape a couple of rectangles on the ground, and you throw some paddles out. Every single time we have met, even in the summer, even when it was 110, we've had a student walk up at some point while we're meeting. And so all summer, we'd have our Wednesday night Bible studies, and now they're Thursdays during the semester. And we'll do our Bible study, and then we'll start playing pickleball, and they won't leave. We'll be there till 11:30, 12, sometimes 12:30. The time that I'm most proud of had nothing to do with me. It was midsummer. We've been playing pickleball for 2 or 3 hours, and the first 2 to 3 waves of students have left, and we're down to kind of like 9 that are wrapping up their game, and then just a few people talking. And we're starting to gather, and a student from Weatherford College rides up on a bicycle, 2 backpacks on. The one in the back is full of tennis rackets. The one in the front is full of, thank you, air. The one in the front is full of camera equipment. And he's like, are y'all playing pickleball? Yeah, we're playing pickleball. Do you play pickleball? Oh, I've been playing tennis. I have video like tutorials and lessons, but I'd love to play pickleball. This group of like 8 to 9 students that are pouring sweat, because y'all remember the summer, were ready to leave. And they all stopped, and they just stayed. They stayed, they engaged him, they talked to him, they got to know his story, they kept playing pickleball with him. We're there for 2 more hours because of him. Which, actually, if you'll look at Acts chapter 5, we're going to start in verse 39, and then I'll come back and fill in the gap. But it's too fitting with our verse today, what those students did. You see, verse 39, remember Gamaliel is talking, not to be confused with Gargamel, the wizard from Smurfs. Had to look it up, make sure I wasn't talking about the same guy. Gamaliel is speaking, and we'll get into the details later, but it says, but if it is of God, you will not be able to overthrow them. You might even be found opposing God. So they took his advice. What was interesting in that summer night is there was a group of 19 to 22-year-olds that wanted to leave. They were hungry. We'd been there since 6. They were hot. They were tired. Everything about their personal world in that moment was, I'm ready to go. And that made sense because that was my personal world. And in one moment, they recognized that what God was wanting to do was to invite this young man in, to get to know him, to ask him questions, to answer some of his questions, and to alter his perception of Christianity and Jesus Christ. And so they made a choice right then to not act in opposition to God, but to surrender themselves and be used by God. You get what I'm saying with that? It's a little different. It is funny, the Acts 5, verse 20, when the angel opened the door to the prison and let them out, what the angel said to the apostles of go and stand in the temple and speak to the people all the words of this life. From the time Cassie emailed me until this week, I thought that's what I was going to be talking about. That is a verse that grabbed me in the fall of 2006 in an apartment that I shared with 2 other guys where we paid $133 a month in rent. Just so you know, if you ever get an apartment for $133 a month in rent, it also comes with complimentary dozens of cockroaches. No matter how much you keep that apartment clean, God let me be there to learn how to clean. But every day woke up early by moving the cockroaches out of the kitchen. But in that season of life, the thing that God taught me was that verse. Go into the temple and tell them all the words of this life. It was many years ago, and I spoke with Keith about that verse this week. I love that verse. And so John Strapazon, who is our interim, kind of gave me a process for preparing lessons and preparing to speak. And so I sit down earlier this week, and it's like, all right, it's time to work on rooted stuff. And I start going through, and I get to verse 20, and I know there's going to be some things that start to flow and that I'm going to write down, and they're not there. But that's okay because Strap taught me read it 5 times through before you do anything else. So it's like, all right, it's just not going to pop up this time. And then I keep reading, and it turns out God did not want me to speak on verse 20. He wanted me to speak on verse 39. So again, I could be found in opposition to God by doing the thing that I want, or I can just go with what God has. In the run up to our focus today, which will be 39, I just want to look briefly at 33 and 34. When they heard this, the Sanhedrin, they were enraged and wanted to kill them. Now, you've read this week, so you know the context of that. But verse 34, so you've got a group, you've got the Sanhedrin wanting to kill the apostles. But in verse 34, a Pharisee in the council named Gamaliel, a teacher of the law, held in honor by all the people, stood up and gave orders to put the men outside for a little while. Now, here's what we know about Gamaliel. We know that not only is he on the Sanhedrin, we know that he's a Pharisee. And remember, you got your Pharisees and your Sadducees. And if we're going to put them in 2 different groups, because that's what we do, then they were in 2 different groups. The Pharisees were much more aligned with Yahweh than the Sadducees. Sadducees did not believe in the resurrection of the dead. There's a big problem with that if you follow the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. The Pharisees did. Pharisees did a lot of wicked things, but you know what? Nicodemus was a Pharisee. Pharisees really were, at their core, trying to seek God. So we know there's a different level of hope with them. Gamaliel is a Pharisee. Not only that, we know that he's respected, it tells us right there, but he holds authority because he gave an order and they did it. It's not just he said, what if we put them outside? And they're like, maybe. No, they did it. They put them outside. But your study Bibles will note that he is the most prominent rabbi of the day. And there's two reasons that we're thankful for Gamaliel. The first one is the moment that's about to occur. But the second is in Acts 22, when Paul is sharing his testimony. We learn that the man who taught him the scriptures was this man. Paul sat under the feet of Gamaliel. Paul, who used the Old Testament to show his fellow Jews that Jesus was the promised Messiah of the Old Testament, learned the Old Testament from this great teacher. So we're thankful for what he did. He missed, right? He missed. But we are thankful that God used him to accomplish his purposes. But look with me starting in verse 35 through 38, because he's presenting an argument. And he said to them, men of Israel, take care what you are about to do with these men. For before these days, Theudas rose up, claiming to be somebody, and a number of men, about 400, joined him. He was killed, and all who followed him were dispersed and came to nothing. After him, Judas the Galilean rose up in the days of the census and drew away some of the people after him. He too perished, and all who followed him were scattered. So in the present case, I tell you, keep away from these men and let them alone. For if this plan or this undertaking is of man, it will fail. So he gives two illustrations. Gamaliel gives two illustrations right off the bat that shows if this thing, if this way, that thing that they keep calling the way, if it's of men, hey, it's not eternal. If it originates from man, if it is a part of the heart of man, it is temporary. So you can hold your water because it's not eternal. And that's true. That's true. If it's of men, it's temporary. I don't have to lead a revolution because I know that if it is not of God, it will end in God's perfect timing, not in me causing chaos. But he says he's going to continue in just a moment, verse 39, but if it is of God, you will not be able to overthrow them. You might even be found opposing God. So they took his advice. I'm going to pray real quick. Lord, I thank you for your word. I thank you that you have made sure that we know this story and that we have access to the details of this moment in your work in the life of your church. And so, God, I pray that you would minister to us in this. You brought each of us here for a specific purpose. And so, God, would you clear our hearts and would you clear our minds so that we are able to, with great clarity, hear what that is. In your name, amen. Now, what grabbed me about this was not necessarily a long or a great in-depth word of verse 39. It's more of a reminding word that I may even be found opposing God. That's what grabbed my heart. And that was the instructions. Read through it. Whatever jumps out to you, whatever sticks out to you, whatever grabs your heart, share that with our ladies. What grabbed my heart is the thought that I may even be found opposing God. Some of the men that are on the Sanhedrin are wicked and evil men. Some of the men that are on the Sanhedrin are far from God. They are enemies of God, but we wouldn't look at them and hold our children back from interacting with them. There are men who are pursuing God in the scriptures, but they are also opposing God because God is doing a new work in this moment in history. And they are not only resistant to that new work, they are trying to keep that new work from progressing. You picking up what I'm putting down with that? They have been found opposing God. So I have to ask myself, where am I likely to be found opposing God right now? Like me, Andy, at the end of September, the beginning of October 2023, with all the things that happen in the Brady household right now, where am I likely to be found opposing God? I don't think any of us are going to stand as jurors with apostles in front of us, determining whether they live or die. But God is at work in and amongst us. You have homes, you have jobs, or you have friends, or you have a neighborhood, or you're obviously part of a Bible study, you're in a church. Where could God be at work that I am tempted or more likely to be found opposing him? For me, this may not be for you, for me, it is those things that I love the most. The things that are in the sphere of my world, the orbit of my universe, that I am most tempted to grab and say that that's mine. That's mine. So it will be my marriage. It will be my marriage. Why? Because I value my marriage. I love my wife. And so I'm more likely to be found opposing God in this. So to try to keep my heart from that, what do? I surrender my marriage to it. It's with my children. They're still at this age that all those unspoken hopes and dreams that I have for all three of them are all still in front of us. Right? And there is a path and a way that if they let me, I will guide them down perfectly. But that's not what God made them for. God did not give me John, Anna, and Josie to be made in the image and likeness of Andy or of Jordan. He allowed Jordan and I to be the parent as stewards of raising our children for his purposes and his plan. And I don't want to be found in opposition to what he's doing. So what do? I get a lot of advice. I ask a lot of people questions. People that I meet with, like you, share what is going on. And there's a group of men that have permission to ask me any question at any time. And one of the things in these conversations is my heart as a dad. And one of them very specifically is really good at making sure I am not in the way of what God is wanting to do in the life of my kids. But instead, I'm standing out of the way and I'm trying to be a faithful steward. You get what I'm saying? And it's been really interesting is probably the safest word I can use. It's been really interesting when God has revealed to me that I'm in the way of what he's wanting to do. Because I'm really smart if God would just listen to me. I don't want to be found opposing God, even when it's scary. My dad's family has been in Merkel, Texas since before it was a town. My grandmother still owns part of that original farm. Her cousin owns the farm next door, and 2 farms down is another 17 ways down the line cousin. And thank God, when I was growing up, my dad was the first one to move his family away. And the reason I say thank God is because there was literally, more likely than not, no girl in that area that I could marry without making the tree come back to center. You know what I mean? So there was a need for that. But how terrifying to move your family from the only place your family has ever been, to go to a new place. It was just a 3-hour drive. It was still Texas. It was still America. All those things are still normal, and none of them are the same. And I'm in the U-Haul riding shotgun with my daddy, and as we get on I-20 to move, I remember just crying because I'd only ever known one world. So why am I using that example? Because God had prompted my parents to move. And as much as it hurt, as difficult as it was, as much uncertainty as there was from loving and caring friends and family, they were obedient because they didn't want to be found opposing God. Why does that influence me today? Because my dad showed me what it's like to trust God with the scariest thing in the world. What it's like to go from having built-in childcare and assistance to trusting God to meet those needs, which allowed my wife and I to make a couple of moves and has allowed us to be open-handed with where we are and what we do, because I saw that I can trust God with anything, and I fear what it looks like to be found opposing God. So in the life of my children, do I have desires for them? Yes. Do I have hopes for them? Yeah. Like there are certain things that I hope John does in life because I'll get to do that with him. And there are certain things I hope my daughters do in life because I'll get to join them in that. But at the end of the day, my job as daddy is to show them that they can trust God with the scary and with the things that they love the most. Because I'm really just getting ready to release them. It's an 18-year process of letting go and releasing. You know what I mean with that? Like, you tracking me with this? And so I read this. If it is of God, you will not be able to overthrow them. You might even be found opposing God. So they took his advice. And so we have a new pastor who's in the office today, and because today is the day that Jordan works, part of our rhythm is, that means I'm getting here between 9 and 9:15, but usually closer to 9:18, as Tamara can testify, to drop off Josie at the preschool. I'm guessing Pastor Jim was here at 8:30 when we're supposed to be here, and I roll at 9:18. It's like, cool, great morning. Nice to meet you. I'm late. But I'm teaching, so it's okay. But here's the deal. We got a new pastor. A new pastor that a group of 10 people that we voted on and prayed through and trust that God led to select him, and I trust those men and women. And I am super excited. I've been asked this week, how do I feel about the new pastor? I said, I'm eager. I am eager. Are you kidding me? That sermon a month and a half ago was incredible. What he said to the staff was amazing. All the just internet stalking that I've done of him, Pastor Jim, please don't watch this. All the internet stalking that I've done of him, I am eager. And I know one thing to be true, that change will come. And when change comes in the work of the children of God, it does not negate the work that God has done previously. But often, the group of people in the world, Christians, who should be the most open to change, because we have our core beliefs that we hold with a closed hand, because to open this up means someone's losing salvation or they're not receiving salvation. But outside of this, man, we get to be open with things. We get to embrace change because we have an eternal God that we serve and we trust. But I know that change is coming, and that's probably going to have an impact on, for sure, the church that my family attends, maybe even the way that the job that I've been hired to do gets done. But am I going to be found opposing God in this change? Or am I going to be found eager and excited to see God work? And that was where this passage really punched me in the heart this week. If you'll flip back to Mark chapter 2, Jesus gave a warning very similar to this. Not a warning, but some advice. Mark chapter 2. Jesus has been asked about why his disciples don't fast, and he is explaining, look, this is different than the Mosaic law. Things are different. But what I really want to focus on is verse 22. And no one puts new wine into old wineskins. If he does, the wine will burst the skins, and the wine is destroyed, and so are the skins. But new wine is for fresh wineskins. Y'all understand? The wineskin was leather. It's soft, it's pliable, but as it gets older, it gets firm. So whenever it's soft and pliable, if then I pour the new wine into it, as it ferments and expands with the gases, that pliable wineskin leather is able to expand with it. But if I fill an old wineskin of leather with new wine, old wineskin, old leather being tough, it's not malleable. It's not able to expand with the wine. So it will burst. And so when God does a new work, or when God is wanting to do a new work, what he has shown me over time, through many times that after the fact I realized I had been opposing God because I don't like change. Or I held on to something longer than he wanted me to hold on to it. He's used other people to remind me it takes new wineskin, bless you, to receive new wine. Bless you again. A third one you have to leave, though. Those are the rules in the classroom. I can't change it. Here's the thing. There are going to be new things that come up. I have no idea what they are. I just know I get to serve at a church that has an established pattern and history of saying, we're new wineskin, we want new wine. How can I say that with confidence? Because I serve in a role that was created from a church that said we want new wine. In order for God to do something different, we're going to need to make this change in our structure and our staff. So they created a new position for God to do a new work of ministry. So I know that that's the fabric and the nature of our church. I serve in a role that was created 5 years ago. And we are seeing new wine come from that. Our church has said we're not going to be in opposition to what God is doing in the lives of young adults in Parker County. We want to be with God in this. As Pastor Jim starts his tenure here over the next months, years, decades, however long, he's going to bring new things because God's going to use him to bring new things. I want to be found not in opposition to God, but eager to see how God does it. Which means I have to remember that when something changes that I love, it's not negating what God did before, but it's occupying a space that God's wanting to use for something new. You know what I mean? Like that's a real thing. So in our ministry, one of the things that we do, a way that we practice this, I don't know if this is exactly how you do it in your house or with where you volunteer, but one of the ways that we practice this is in the summers, we'll do a thing called no golden calves. There's no golden calves in our ministry, which means everything is available. So we'll write down everything that we do. I have a big Post-it. My office is nothing but Post-its. It's a large Post-it, and there's 2 of them. And on one of them it says, keep, stop, change. And we put on a Post-it everything that our ministry does and all of the elements of it. So we have small groups. They're called DBC groups. So we put DBC groups. And they were meeting on Tuesdays at one point, so we wrote Tuesdays. And they were meeting in houses, so we wrote houses, and we did a book, and so we wrote book. We wrote all the things down. And then we take a month to pray through, and we say, God, this is what we do, this is what we love, this is how we know to do ministry. What do you want with it? We don't want to be opposing you. Now, I can say this is what we do because I've stood on the other side of that and said, DBC doesn't change. This is what DBC looks like. And I saw the consequence of that. So now we're open-handed with it. And what that's led to is at different semesters and different times, like we don't meet in homes anymore. Why? Because we have a building that we want to be a steward of. Well, but homes, that's where we would connect with people. Yeah, except that when we were obedient to God and we saw what he was wanting us to do, we've had a student walk up, at least one student walk up every single time we've met. Maybe I don't want to be opposing God. And it's changed. We don't do books anymore. This semester we're doing a reading plan where they read for the week and we get together and then we talk about it. I don't know if this sounds familiar with y'all. They talk about what they've read and then we're going to come back together at the end. And then in a large group setting, we'll talk about what was read. That came about from open hands, no golden calves. But ways that I've seen this play out, I've seen families make their adult children or their young adult children's obedience to God difficult because where God is leading them is not where I want them to go. What God is leading them to do is not what I want them to do. You went to school for an agronomy major. Obviously, I went to Tarleton. Agronomy is going to be the first example I give. So you should be doing ag business. Why are you going into ministry? God's called me into ministry. Yeah, but you meet people in the field, just minister there. That's true, I would love to do that, but God's called me into ministry. But I've also seen people uproot their lives and their family with tears streaming down their face are championing them on because you're being obedient. I don't want to be found opposing God. I want to be eager for what God is doing. I've seen delayed obedience on my part where God has given me a directive, but my delay in following him because it's out of my comfort zone places me in opposition to what he's doing. But I'm also watching right now as 2 of my closest friends have seen God say everything about your comfort zone needs to leave, including the continent that you live on. And so I'm watching them systematically go through and sell everything to go move to a new continent. Like it's amazing. God is going to accomplish his purpose. I want to be eager for that. But I've got to examine my life and see where am I most likely to be found opposing him. And it's often with the things that I hold dearest. And I get to show my children that God is trustworthy and he is good. And you can believe it because we're giving him these things that we love most. You know what I mean with that? These men were afraid of losing what they love most. Gamaliel doesn't realize it, but he's dropping some incredible wisdom that would advance the gospel in this. I want to look real quick again if I can find it. I lost my place. I think it's funny. I'm just going to close with this, that Gamaliel between verse 35 and 38 gives two examples of why they can just sit back and wait. Right? He gives two examples, two uprisings that end in the death of their leader. How do we know that we can wait this way out, Gamaliel? What, like, if we let him go, what if this overthrows everything? Guys, don't you remember Theudas? He's dead. Don't you remember Judas? He's dead. He uses the example of uprisings that are led by now dead men to let them know, hey, we don't have to overreact here, fellas. But I find it interesting that the thing that he's talking about, the way, is not actually led by these apostles who would ultimately die, but instead it's led by a man who also died, but unlike the other two examples, rose from the dead. Because it's eternal. It's not temporary. It's eternal. This way, this movement of God has been occurring for all of time and gets to culminate with us worshiping Christ in the throne room at the wedding supper of the Lamb. He didn't know it, but he was comparing two dead men to a resurrected man in a movement that will never end. And I find that just so profound and amazing. I don't really have a deeper word today than as normal, nothing profound. It was just a word of reminder and caution. God is doing something. In order to see it, change comes. I don't want to be found opposing God because I don't like the change. I want to be in a spot where I'm open-handed and submitted to him. I'm going to pray, and then do they leave or do we hang tight? Go to small groups. All right. Lord, I thank you. I thank you that you do a new work. I thank you that you're so creative that you never have to do a work the same way twice. And God, I pray that we would be a light and an example to our community of your creativity, of having done things a certain way for a while, but trusting you and loving you more than the things that you use. And Lord, that we would not be found in opposition to you, but that we would be found eager to usher in your kingdom. Lord, it's in your name we pray. Amen.